Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really immersing ourselves in a critical moment of modern history. It's a story about industrial power.
Yeah, and how that power became maybe the decisive strategic weapon in World War II.
Exactly. We're deep diving into the sources that show how America, which looked completely unprepared, managed to outproduce an empire.
And we're zeroing in on that moment, that clash between German, well, arrogance and the sheer force of American assembly lines.
It really is an incredible narrative.
Oh, absolutely. And the sources, they don't just throw statistics at you. They dig into the logistics, the planning, and honestly, the human willpower behind this colossal shift.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to track how the U.S. pulled this off. How it went from being this consumer nation, still shaky from the Depression,
Right.
to becoming what Roosevelt called the arsenal of democracy, and doing something its enemies literally laughed at.
That laughter is key.
Okay, let's set that stage then. Spring 1940. It's important to get this picture right.
It really is. The sources paint a pretty grim scene globally. Hitler's Germany, it just looks unstoppable. Militarily, they are dominating Europe.
France is weeks, maybe days, from total collapse.
And in the air, it's all about the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, universally seen as swift, brutal, incredibly efficient.
Unmatched. That's the word that keeps coming up.
Completely unmatched at that point.
Yeah.
And running the show is Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring. He's the head of the Luftwaffe.
Right, the flamboyant one.
Yeah, living large in his Berlin headquarters, absolutely confident, basking in this string of victories, totally convinced of German superiority, industrial, military, everything.
And it's into this atmosphere that news arrives from across the Atlantic.
Exactly. President Franklin D. Roosevelt makes this declaration. And to Göring, sitting there in Berlin, it must have sounded utterly delusional.
What was the declaration again?
Roosevelt announces that America, remember, still officially neutral, would soon be producing 50,000 warplanes a year.
50,000 a year.
50,000. And you have to understand Göring's perspective here. He's looking at the U.S. through, well, the Nazi ideological lens.
Which saw America as
chaotic. Democratic, sure, but messy. Struggling with unemployment, obsessed with consumer goods, cars, movies, soft.
not a serious military-industrial power like the Reich.
Not even close, in his view. He's leading the world's top air force. And he hears the leader of this peacetime nation promise an output many times larger than what the entire world was managing at that moment.
So naturally, he laughs.
He laughs. And that specific moment of mockery, it's captured in that quote, isn't it? That's the core of the arrogance we're digging into.
Can you share the quote again?
He reportedly scoffed, sneering something like, "How can a nation of shopkeepers, car dealers, and movie makers outbuild the Reich?"
Wow, shopkeepers, car dealers, and movie makers. What does that reveal about how fundamentally he misunderstood America?
It shows a complete failure to grasp what American capitalism, especially mass production, was capable of. He saw the consumer output, the cars, the radios, as weakness, as frivolity.
Instead of seeing the underlying system.
Exactly. He didn't see that the very infrastructure that churned out millions of affordable cars using standardized parts was actually a dormant weapon, hugely scalable, just waiting to be pointed in a different direction.
He basically underestimated the power of the assembly line itself.
He did. The Nazis were brilliant at making high-quality, often very complex, almost custom-built military gear. Think of the Tiger tank. Amazing machine, but hard to produce in vast numbers.
Whereas
America's genius was in standardized, rapid, volume production. Henry Ford's legacy, really.
Right.
And this war would prove which approach held the strategic edge.
So our mission then, for you listening, is to follow this thread, starting with Göring's joke.
Right.
And see exactly how that seemingly impossible target of 50,000 planes wasn't just met, but smashed. And how that industrial might turned Göring's laughter into, well, despair. Okay, let's dive into that. This incredible test kicks off in May 1940. Roosevelt issues the call to action.
Yes, that phrase becomes the guiding principle. We must become the great arsenal of democracy.
Powerful words. But the sources really hammer-hum the massive gap between that statement and the reality on the ground.
Oh, it was immense. At that moment, the U.S. Army Air Corps had fewer than 3,000 planes in total.
3,000. To put that in perspective.
Well, think about it. The Luftwaffe had already lost more aircraft than that just in the campaigns against Poland and France. America's entire air force was smaller than Germany's recent losses.
And it wasn't just the low number, was it? The quality was also an issue.
A huge issue. Most of those 3,000 planes were, frankly, obsolete. We're talking older designs like P-36 Hawks with fixed landing gear.
Stuff that couldn't possibly stand up to the Messerschmitt Bif 109s tearing through Europe.
Not a chance. And then there was the domestic situation. The Depression was still casting a long shadow.
Factories were quiet.
Many were idle or still optimized just for civilian stuff. The capacity was there, sure, the buildings, the managers, but it wasn't mobilized for war production.
Yeah.
And you had millions unemployed, but they weren't trained aircraft workers.
So Roosevelt wasn't just asking for a small increase. He was demanding something like a 50-fold jump in producing complex military hardware. And fast.
Exactly. What specific challenges did that present to American industry?
Well, the transformation needed two big shifts, really, and they were interlinked.
Okay.
First, a psychological one. You had to convince industrialists, guys who'd spent the last decade fiercely competing, guarding trade secrets.
Like protecting their own turf.
To suddenly cooperate, to share blueprints, pool resources for the national good. That's a huge mental shift.
Then the second shift.
Logistical,
Yeah.
purely physical. Taking a factory floor designed to make, say, refrigerators smoothly and repetitively,
Yeah.
and adapting it for the massive, high-precision work needed for bombers or fighter planes. It wasn't just flipping a switch. It meant huge investments in new tools, new processes, and massive training programs.
The sources often use that metaphor, right?
Yeah.
America's industrial heart awakening like a sleeping giant.
Yes, it captures the scale, but also the speed implied. How quickly did things actually start moving?
The will was there almost immediately after Roosevelt's call, but the practical planning, the coordination, that took a bit of time. The first big hurdle wasn't just building planes, it was organizing the chaos.
Managing the private sector.
Exactly. You needed someone, some central figure, who could rise above all the corporate rivalries and make these companies work together.
Which leads us perfectly into segment 2, the architects of the arsenal. Who was the person tasked with this monumental job?
That would be William Knudsen.
Okay.
At the time, he was the president of General Motors. You could argue he was the most significant industrialist in America, outside of banking maybe. A real master of the assembly line, efficiency, volume production.
And the sources make a point of his status, don't they, to highlight what he gave up?
They really do. He's described as a titan of peacetime production. His salary was over $300,000 a year.
Which back then was just astronomical.
Absolutely obscene money for the time. He was the epitome of corporate success.
But he answered the call.
Immediately. No hesitation. Roosevelt asks him to lead this national production effort, and Knudsen walks away from GM from that huge salary from the power.
To work for what, $1 a year?
Just $1 a year. Symbolic, of course, but what a symbol. It sent a powerful message across the entire industry. If the head of GM is doing this for basically nothing, everyone understood how serious the situation was.
So what was his first big job? Getting these rivals to cooperate.
That was job number one. His mission was nothing less than synchronizing companies that were normally bitter competitors. Ford, Boeing, Douglas, Chrysler, plus hundreds, thousands of smaller suppliers.
Bringing them into one cohesive war machine?
Yes, he had to establish the framework. This eventually became the War Production Board, WPB. It dictated who built what, how they built it, and crucially forced them to share designs, tooling, techniques, things they'd normally guard jealously.
That collaboration sounds like an absolute nightmare to manage. Ford sharing secrets with, say, Consolidated Aircraft. That's hard to imagine.
It was unprecedented. But Knudsen had the authority, backed by the president, and the immense respect of the industry.
What did this conversion look like on the factory floor? We hear about car plants making tanks, but what are some specific examples from the sources?
Oh, the examples are fascinating. You had refrigerator companies like Kelvinator and Nash switching over completely to making things like propeller blades or shell casings.
Wow.
Typewriter companies, Underwood, Royal, they started mass-producing parts for rifles or tiny, precise components for aircraft instruments.
Even car transmission factories.
Yes, those lines were already geared for high-precision work with gears and bearings. They were converted to make critical aircraft engine components. It was about repurposing existing skills and machinery wherever possible.
So it wasn't just turning off car production and turning on plane production. It was a fundamental re-engineering of the whole system.
Driven by urgent military needs that were constantly changing too. Blueprints would arrive, sometimes incomplete, demanding new materials, new techniques, like welding aluminum, which is much trickier than steel.
And the workforce needed training for all this.
Thousands upon thousands needed training, not just basic assembly, but these new complex skills. This is where Knudsen's GM background was key. He understood how to break down complex tasks, how to train people quickly, how to apply that Ford-style mass production thinking to absolutely anything, even bombers.
He essentially weaponized mass production, but was it smooth sailing from the start? Did this incredibly fast pivot cause problems, like with quality control?
That's a really important point. And no, it wasn't seamless initially. There were definitely hiccups.
Such as?
Well, the sources talk about early B-24 bombers, for example, having some structural issues, or engines failing because parts made under pressure didn't quite meet the incredibly tight tolerances needed for aviation. When you push that hard for quantity, quality can slip at first.
So how did they fix that?
Knudsen and the WPB had to react fast. They implemented really strict inspection protocols. The mantra became sort of quality over quantity for the short term to get it right. They needed the planes fast, but they also needed them to work and keep pilots safe. It was a steep learning curve.
But they learned incredibly fast.
At warp speed, you could say, which actually is a great way to transition to the place that maybe best represents this whole industrial miracle, Ford's Willow Run factory.
Ah, yes, Willow Run, Segment 3, the industrial miracle.
This place was built specifically for one plane, right?
Primarily, yes, the B-24 Liberator bomber. And choosing the B-24 for this kind of extreme mass production was itself a statement. This wasn't a small fighter plane.
No, the Liberator was huge.
Yeah.
4 engines, massive wingspan.
Capable of flying huge distances with a heavy bomb load, a complex strategic weapon designed by Consolidated Aircraft. But Ford, with Knudsen's influence, was tasked with building it like it was a Ford V8.
The descriptions of the factory itself are just mind-boggling. A city under one roof, over a mile long. It had its own power station, fire department, post office, eventually employing around 60,000 people.
What were the challenges of building something as big as a B-24 on an assembly line inside a mile-long building?
Well, the whole layout was revolutionary for aircraft. Traditionally, planes were built in static positions, teams moving around them. Willow Run used a constantly moving assembly line, adapted from car manufacturing.
So the plane moved down the line?
Yes. Huge sections, fuselage halves, wings moved along the line. The challenge was coordinating that movement, making sure the right parts arrived at the right station at the right time, tens of thousands of parts daily without creating bottlenecks. They even built dedicated railway lines inside the factory.
And the speed they achieved there, that's the number everyone remembers.
It's the benchmark. It redefined what mass production could mean for heavy industry. At its absolute peak, get this, a fully assembled B-24 Liberator bomber rolled off the final assembly line every 63 minutes.
It's every 63 minutes.
Engines installed, tested, ready to fly.
That's faster than some car factories today. Applied to a 4-engine heavy bomber? How is that even possible?
2 words, standardization and interchangeability.
Yeah.
Ford, under Charles Sorensen, really perfected the tooling. They made jigs and fixtures so precise that a wing built in one part of the plant would fit perfectly onto a fuselage built somewhere else days later.
Yeah.
No custom filing and fitting needed.
Something the original designer struggled with.
Yes, Consolidated's own plants couldn't achieve that level of perfect interchangeability on this scale. Applying that level of standardized precision to something as complex as a bomber was, well, uniquely American at the time.
And this insane velocity at Willow Run and places like it is what led to those staggering overall production numbers later in the war.
Absolutely. By 1944, forget the initial 50,000 target. They weren't just meeting it, they were leaving it in the dust.
What was the peak number again? It's worth repeating.
In the single year of 1944, the United States produced 96,270 military aircraft.
96,270 in 1 year.
It almost sounds made up, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Compared to what other nations were doing, even Germany or Britain.
And this number had a fascinating effect on the enemy, right? German intelligence.
They literally refused to believe it. They had their own ways of estimating enemy production based on factory size, resources, past output. And this number, nearly 100,000 aircraft in a year, was so far beyond their calculations.
I thought it was propaganda.
Crude American propaganda, yes.
Mm-hmm.
They simply couldn't conceive of an industrial system capable of that output. Their own system, focused on perfection over volume, couldn't do it, so they assumed no one could.
So the production itself became a psychological weapon. The enemy couldn't even comprehend the scale of what was about to hit them.
It was a failure of imagination, really rooted in their own ideology and arrogance. They just couldn't grasp the power of mobilized, democratic, capitalist production. Willow Run wasn't just building planes, it was building disbelief in the enemy headquarters.
An unstoppable force. But machines need people. Which brings us to segment 4, the workforce revolution. This level of production needed a similar revolution in labor.
Absolutely, and this is where the human story really shines. The scale of production demanded a huge mobilization of American workers, and it fundamentally changed who worked and where.
The icon of this change is Rosie the Riveter.
She is, and the numbers are incredible. Over 310,000 women entered the industrial workforce, specifically in roles directly supporting war production, often taking jobs previously held only by men.
What kinds of jobs were women moving into, things previously thought too technical for them?
Oh, definitely. They became welders, especially skilled in working with aluminum. They were riveting structural components on wings and fuselages, really critical work, operating heavy machinery, cranes, presses, assembling complex electrical systems for navigation and bombing computers.
And they excelled at it.
Often, yes. The sources point out that for tasks requiring dexterity, patience, fine motor skills, women often proved more adept than the previous workforce. They were crucial to maintaining quality, alongside the incredible quantity.
And it wasn't just women, right? The workforce became much more diverse overall.
Totally. You had teenagers getting special permits to leave school early and work. Recent immigrants found opportunities. Housewives who had never worked outside the home joined the lines. Men transitioned from totally different sectors like farming or retail.
And they all had to learn these complex jobs incredibly quickly.
That rapid training was key. Knudsen and others implemented these modular training programs. You didn't spend years as an apprentice. You learned one specific vital task very well, very quickly, through repetition and focused instruction. People went from zero knowledge to proficient welders or riveters in a matter of weeks.
And these factories, Detroit, Seattle, Southern California, they were running nonstop.
Around the clock. 204/7, 3 shifts a day. It meant a complete disruption of normal life, a total national commitment.
There's that powerful contrast the sources draw.
Yes, it's quite poetic, isn't it? While German bombers were forcing blackouts across Europe, plunging cities into darkness.
American factories were blazing with light.
All night long. Roaring with the sound of production, literally illuminating the war effort, churning out weapons faster than the enemy could destroy them on the other side of the world.
That relentless work, that human sacrifice on the home front, directly translated into power on the front lines, knowing the supplies would keep coming.
That assurance is invaluable for morale, for strategy. It allows commanders to plan knowing they won't run out of planes or bullets, which is exactly what enables the next phase, Segment 5, the turning of the tide.
By 1943, this industrial tsunami starts to make a real difference in the air war over Europe.
You start seeing the results. Those waves of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, the ones rolling out of Willow Run, are now appearing over Germany in huge numbers.
But wasn't there a problem early on with bomber losses?
There was. Heavy losses. Because the bombers initially didn't have fighter escorts that could go all the way with them to targets deep inside Germany and back.
So what changed? What was the key?
The game changer was the P-51 Mustang.
Ah, the Mustang.
Amazing aircraft. Originally designed for the British with an American engine, it was okay. But then they fitted it with the powerful, reliable Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same one in the Spitfire.
And that gave it
Performance, but crucially, range. Especially when they added external drop tanks for extra fuel. Suddenly, the Mustang could fly all the way to Berlin and back, escorting the bombers, fighting off the German interceptors.
So you combine the massive volume of bombers with these long-range, high-performance escorts.
And you have the recipe for devastating strategic bombardment. Now they could hit targets deep in the German heartland repeatedly.
What was the impact on Germany's war machine?
It was crippling. Systemic. The sources are clear. Oil production collapsed because refineries were constantly bombed. Synthetic fuel plants, vital for Germany, were destroyed. Ball-bearing factories, essential for almost any machinery, were flattened. Railway yards and bridges were targeted, choking transportation.
And couldn't fuel their tanks or planes, couldn't move troops or supplies.
Exactly. The sheer volume of bombs, delivered relentlessly thanks to the volume of planes, just strangled the German war economy and logistics.
Now, Germany did try to respond technologically, didn't they, with jets like the Me-262?
They did.
Yeah.
And the Me-262 was, technologically, a leap ahead. Faster, armed with cannons, a truly formidable fighter.
Yeah, but it wasn't enough. Why not?
It comes back to that core theme, volume versus technology. The Me-262 was amazing, but it was complex, difficult to manufacture, especially the jet engines, which used rare alloys and needed constant maintenance. Production was slow, pilot training was difficult.
Whereas the U.S. kept churning out
thousands upon thousands of proven, reliable, easier-to-maintain piston engine fighters, like the Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt. They perfected the production of good enough in overwhelming numbers,
Which leads to that stark, decisive ratio.
the killer statistic. By late in the war, for every single aircraft Germany managed to produce, the United States was building 10.
10 to 1.
10 to 1. It didn't matter how good the Me-262 was. If it was consistently facing odds like that, it couldn't possibly stem the tide.
So the Luftwaffe basically bled out.
Precisely. It wasn't a failure of German pilot courage or skill. It was a failure of industrial capacity. They simply couldn't replace their losses planes and experienced pilots anywhere near fast enough. The factories Göring laughed at were burying his Luftwaffe under sheer weight of numbers.
That laughter really comes back to haunt him.
Which brings us to the endgame, segment 6, Göring's realization and the legacy.
Yeah, the man who made that boastful prediction in 1940 eventually had to confront the reality of his miscalculation.
And this happens where, years later, after the war, at the Nuremberg trials, Göring is on trial, stripped of his power, his medals, his bravado, and he makes this admission.
The quote is quite something, isn't it? A complete reversal.
It really is. He confessed, and this is widely reported, something to the effect of, "I knew we had lost when I saw that America's production had exceeded my worst fears."
His worst fears were about American factories. Not their generals, not their soldiers, their production lines.
Think about that. The thing he dismissed as belonging to shopkeepers turned out to be the decisive weapon that fulfilled his deepest strategic nightmare. That industrial power, that avalanche of steel and aluminum coming out of places like Willow Run, is what he finally acknowledged had doomed the Third Reich. The laughter of 1940 choked in the face of 1944's production numbers.
And the final production numbers for the entire war just underscored this industrial dominance.
The final tally is just staggering. By the end of the war, the United States had produced a total of 295,959 aircraft.
Nearly 300,000 planes. Let's put that in context again.
It was more than Germany and Japan combined throughout the entire war.
So this wasn't just about winning battles. It was about winning the war through production capacity.
Exactly. The sources frame it clearly. This wasn't luck. It was a victory of a system, democratic mobilization, industrial cooperation driven by national will, and sheer human determination on the factory floor.
It proved that principle for modern war.
That production lines can win where front lines bleed. If you can replace your losses infinitely faster than your enemy, attrition alone guarantees victory, assuming the will to fight remains.
And the legacy of this, how did the arsenal of democracy change things long term?
It fundamentally redefined global power. It wasn't just about territory or army size anymore. True power in the modern industrial age was inextricably linked to economic capacity, particularly the ability to rapidly convert that capacity to military ends. America demonstrated that on a scale never seen before, and it shaped the entire post-war world order.
So we've taken a deep dive today into how American industry, initially underestimated and even mocked, rose to become the decisive factor against Nazi Germany. From Göring's laugh to the roar of Willow Run.
We tracked that journey from consumer nation to the arsenal of democracy, showing how industrial might became the ultimate strategic weapon. The sheer scale is mind-blowing.
And the human element, Rosie the Riveter, William Knudsen, the countless workers running factories 204/7 is just as vital to remember. It wasn't just machines, it was people making it happen. That B-24 rolling off the line every 63 minutes was built by someone's hands.
That collective will, harnessed to industrial genius, is what ultimately defeated arrogance.
Before we sign off, we always like to leave you, our listeners, with something to think about, building on what we discussed.
Right. We've seen how this massive, rapid industrial pivot by the U.S. redefined power in the mid-20th century. It proved that a nation's ability to scale production was perhaps its greatest strategic asset.
But the world looks very different today, doesn't it? Industry is globalized, supply chains stretch across continents.
Manufacturing is often highly specialized and dispersed. Very few nations possess that kind of integrated, self-sufficient industrial base that the U.S. had in the 1940s.
So the provocative thought for you is this. In today's interconnected, perhaps more fragile global economy, what constitutes the arsenal of democracy now?
What does industrial scale even mean when critical components might come from a dozen different countries, some potentially hostile? Could a similar rapid national mobilization even happen today?
And perhaps more pointedly, echoing Göring's mistake. What strategic vulnerabilities might exist in our current globalized system that potential adversaries might be underestimating, or perhaps that we are underestimating about them?
It's about understanding where true productive power lies in the 21st century. The core lesson, though, remains. Collective will, combined with the ability to produce and sustain, is fundamental. That's the enduring legacy of how America's factories answered Göring's laugh.